When terrorists strike, our politicians must be seen to be doing something to react to what has happened, try to reassure us they're doing everything possible to stop it happening again. And obviously there is a place for rhetoric. They have to show they share the nation's grief. But that apart, what can they do faced with a terrorist organisation as ruthless, determined and well-resourced as Islamic State? When 9/11 happened, Tony Blair joined George Bush in declaring a war on terror. And many came to believe that was spectacularly mistaken. There is no such language in the article David Cameron has written for The Telegraph this morning. Mr Cameron is with me in the studio. Good morning, Prime Minister.
Good morning.
Before we get on to the broad picture, Theresa May, the Home Secretary, is going there today.
That's right. Theresa May and the Foreign Office Minister Tobias Ellwood are flying out to Tunisia to have meetings with government ministers to talk about security, to how to combat terrorism, but also to go to Sousse and see for themselves what has happened, and obviously to give their condolences to all those who've lost loved ones. This is an absolutely horrific attack, and I know it shocked the whole of the country, it shocked the whole of the world, and what we must do in the short term is respond as well as we can, helping to bring back the wounded, and today we'll be sending out a RAF C-17 to help with that evacuation of casualties, and also work as fast as we can to inform the families about the terrible news. And I know it has taken time, but these are very difficult things and we must get them right.
And bringing back bodies?
Well, we're very happy to look at that. There'll be all sorts of other arrangements being put in place, but I'm keen that as a nation we show respect and our condolences to the victims, and if they would like that, for us to try and bring back the bodies of their loved ones with dignity and with respect, that's something we can do.
The bigger picture, does Islamic State pose an existential threat to the Western world, to us?
I believe it does. I mean, I wish the BBC would stop calling it Islamic State, because it's not an Islamic State. What it is an appalling, barbarous regime. It is a perversion of the religion of Islam. And, you know, many Muslims listening to this programme will recoil every time they hear the words Islamic State.
Tricky to find. If they called it that themselves, then it's tricky to find. We can call it so-called, but anyway.
Well, so-called or ISIL is better. But it is an existential threat, because what's happening here is the perversion of a great religion and the creation of this poisonous death cult, and that is seducing too many young minds in Europe, in America, in the Middle East and elsewhere.
Well, in that case,
and this is, I think, going to be the struggle of our generation, and we have to fight it with everything that we can.
But we're not at the moment, are we? If it is an existential threat, then we have to go to war against it in every sense. It is literally a war for our existence against their existence. That's what it means, existential threat. And we're not doing that.
Well, I don't accept that. What we have to do is show extraordinary resolve and strength, but we also have to use intelligence. The way to combat this threat and to beat it, and I believe we will beat it, because our system of values of democracy and freedom and fairness and tolerance is so much greater than their system of values, is you have to have what I'd call a sort of full spectrum response. Yes, of course, you have to crush ISIL in Iraq and Syria, and Britain's playing a very large part in that.
Well, that's arguable.
Well, come on, but I mean, the figures show that in Iraq we are the second largest contributor to airstrikes. We've actually done
Not
more.
According to Lord Dannett, we are not.
Well, I mean, I'm afraid the figures speak for themselves. We are the second largest contributor. We've actually done more in terms of airstrikes than actually in previous Iraq conflicts. But my argument is that, you know, squeezing it at source and destroying it at source is not enough. We have to deal with this appalling radical narrative that's taking over the minds of so many young people in our own country. So it's a battle you have to fight on every front. There's obviously what happens in Iraq and Syria. There's putting together a new government in Libya. But there's also making sure that we invest in counter-terrorism and policing here in the UK, and we're doing that. But I think perhaps the most important piece of all is to take on and defeat this poisonous narrative of extremism that is poisoning so many minds.
Come to that in a moment, but on the question of our military action against ISIL, if that's what we're going to call it, over the last 9 months, since September, we've launched 300 strikes. The Americans have launched 6,000. It's a pinprick, isn't it? But the problem with it is that it identifies us alongside the United States and therefore makes us a greater target than we otherwise might be.
Well, I think that, frankly, we are a target. They have declared war on us, and they are attacking our people at home and overseas, whether we like it or not. And frankly, I don't think you can hide from this threat or think that if you step back somehow you become less of a target. I mean, if you take a 10-year view, we've been fighting Al-Qaeda and now ISIL and Al-Qaeda. There have been bomb attacks in Bali, attacks on Turkish banks, attacks on the British underground, attacks in Belgian museums and French newspaper offices. They are attacking our way of life and what we stand for. And so we have to stand united with others who share our values and, as I say, attack this problem at its source in Iraq and Syria, but also do more to combat it wherever it occurs. And that is rather like when we were fighting communism in the Cold War. It's a battle of our values and our narrative against their values and their narrative. We have to get that right, as well as the military end of the conflict. But I'm not underestimating the military end of the conflict. And therefore, there are people in Iraq and Syria who are plotting to carry out terrible acts in Britain and elsewhere. And as long as ISIL exists in those two countries, we are at threat.
And therefore, should we not listen to people like Lord Dannett with his huge military experience, people like James Rubin, former American Assistant Secretary of State, who say the military effort is not nearly effective enough? And one way to magnify the effectiveness of the air campaign is for us and the United States to deploy, and I'm quoting Rubin here, a modest contingent of special forces to identify in real time the targets the coalition aircraft should strike. That would be a further measure.
Well, first of all, we never comment on what our special forces do, and I think it's very important we maintain that position. Second of all, we're investing heavily in the airstrikes that make a difference. But I think third and most important is our strategy, and I think it's the right strategy, is to build local armies in Iraq and in Syria, and local governments in Iraq
in
Syria.
It's failed spectacularly in Iraq.
It's taking a lot. Look, it's much easier to just invade a country. I absolutely accept that.
And
it's
that was
easier
a mistake,
and faster, and that has consequences. Because in the end, I think actually the Secretary General of the UN put it best, look, a missile can kill a terrorist, but it is good government that kills terrorism. And that's what we need. I know this is a long-term plan, but whether it is Iraq, whether it's Syria, whether it's Libya, the same thing is required, which is governments that can represent all of their people. If in Iraq, Prime Minister Abadi can actually demonstrate that he stands for Sunni as well as Shia, Kurd as well as Sunni and Shia, he can build a government and a country that can squeeze out terrorism. And obviously in Syria we have far further to go because President Assad is one of the causes of ISIL. His appalling treatment of Sunni Muslims in Syria is one of the recruiting sergeants for ISIL. So people who say team up with Assad, that would be absolutely the wrong approach. What we have to do in all these countries is build governments and militaries and systems that represent all their people. And then you have a realistic chance of beating what is this perversion of a great religion.
And we have been talking about doing precisely that ever since it became clear that the reaction, the result of the invasion of Iraq was spectacular failure on almost every level, and nothing has happened. Quite the opposite. We now see a situation where ISIL has control of a third of Iraq, a control of half of Syria. They are growing in strength, and we are not stopping them. We're failing.
Well, first of all, actually, ISIL have lost a lot of territory in Iraq, and that's due to the action of the Kurds.
They've also gained other bits of territory.
So let me make my point. First of all, the idea this is not militarily reversible, I think, is not true. I'd also, again, stand back and look at the bigger picture. Our action in Afghanistan, an American action to defeat Al-Qaeda in the northwest Pakistan, that has reduced the threat level from that area of the world radically. Now, it's been replaced by a new threat, the threat of ISIL. The point I'm making is that put your head in the sand, try and cut yourself off from the world, think that it's impossible to deal with these problems approach is wrong. We can, if we show unity, purpose, resolve and determination, work with our allies, use the incredible assets that we have, assert our system of values and democracy and the rest of it. We can beat these people, but it does take extraordinary resolve and patience because this is going to take a very long time. And we have to be in this for the long haul.
And there's the other battle as well, and that's the battle on the streets and in the towns and cities of this country. country where so many young people now are going across, I know in global terms not huge, but nonetheless significant, are going across to join with ISIL, fight with them, and then come back here and sow the seeds of terrorism in this country. And you wrote in the Telegraph this morning about having to reach out to them and to bring them into the fold, as it were, but they're not listening to people like you.
Well, I don't accept. Again, I think that we have two responses here. One is the physical counter-terrorism response, where we've taken the powers to confiscate passports, to stop people from travelling. And, we prosecuted something like 800 people, arrested 800 people for terrorist offences since 2010. The battle of hearts and minds, though, also has to be won. And, of course, as Prime Minister, I have a role in making the argument about the strength of our values, but also what we have seen, and it's worth putting this on the record, imams and Muslim communities and organisations have come out on so many occasions and said what is being done by ISIL is not being done in their name. We need to see that continue. And as I've been putting it, we need to recognise that we're not just fighting terrorism here, we're also fighting extremism. There are many extremists who fall short of actually condoning terrorism, but they buy into a lot of the narrative of the terrorist. They support a caliphate, or they believe that Muslims and Christians can't exist peacefully together, or they want to subjugate women. We have to say in our country, those views, while they fall short of actually condoning terrorism, they're not acceptable either. Now, except as part of this, as Britain, we need to do more to help integrate people into our country. So this job is something for all of us to play a part in. But again, it's this is something that can be fixed. It can be done. It'll take many, many years. But if we identify what the problem is accurately, and I really believe this gateway into terrorism of extremist narratives is part of it. If we identify the problem correctly, we can actually deal with it.
If you identify the problem correctly, and Lady Varsi, former chairman of your party, thinks you're going the wrong way about it. She has said, I quote her, it's incredibly odd and incredibly worrying that over time more and more individuals, more and more organisations are considered by the government to be beyond the pale and therefore not to be engaged with.
Well, I have an honest disagreement with Saida, who I've debated this many times. My point is that we should engage with imams, with Muslim communities, with Muslim organisations, but we should have some basic rules in terms of our engagement. And if organisations back extremist preachers or believe that, it's all right to be a suicide bomber in Israel, it's just not all right to commit terrorist acts elsewhere, then I think we have a serious problem. That's why the way we engage should be engaging with organisations that want to build an integrated, democratic, successful, multiracial Britain. That's what I believe in, and that's what most Muslims believe in, the vast majority. And I think actually having a dialogue with people that don't take that view, I think doesn't help. And I think
So there hasn't been enough condemnation on the part of too many Muslims.
No, what I say, there's been lots of...
Do you believe that to be the case?
No, I don't think that's the case. As I said, there have been mosques and imams and Muslim communities across Britain.
But not all.
Actually, on a very wide scale, and actually President Obama quoted the Not in My Name initiative that British Muslims took. And you see that every day, and it's incredibly powerful. The point I'm making is there are some organisations and some people who buy not the terrorism, but they buy a lot of the extremist narrative. And to those people, we've got to say, that is not an acceptable view. And we're not going to engage with people who believe that, there ought to be a caliphate and women should be subjugated.
But what does not engaging with them actually mean? Well, if that is what they believe, that is what they believe.
Well, my point is, some organisations set themselves up as representative of Muslim communities when actually they're not. And
so what do we do about them?
Well, don't
close them down.
But don't treat them as spokespeople for the whole of the community. That's what they want you to do. Organisations like Hizb...
You can't stop people listening to other people.
Of course you can't. But the British government has a responsibility of working with mainstream Muslims, the vast majority in Britain, who want a successful multiracial opportunity democracy in Britain. That's what we want. So let's engage with those people and let's praise them when, as they do, they tweet and blog and speak in defiance of ISIL and everything that it does.
Let's talk about the European Union fairly briefly, I'm afraid.